Meriel, good morning, and thank you very much for joining us here on AU Manufacturing Conversations.
Well, thanks for having me, Brett. It's a pleasure to be here.
Pleasure to reconnect. Let's get to the routine first question of this series, and that is, how did you get here and what do you make?
Well, I'm a textile scientist. I work in the textile industry. I have a business that works with local manufacturers of textiles, and that includes cotton that we trace back to one farm in St George, Australian super cotton, and we make cloth using mills here in Australia. So the first thing I end up saying is, yes, we still can make textiles in Australia, although we do have to do one stage overseas. We can't spin a yarn here, which is kind of ironic given our nation's ability to spin a yarn. But technically, we can't at scale for cotton. So we do that overseas. How did I get here more broadly? I have been playing and making with things with textiles essentially since I could stand almost. And it's just something that I've always loved. And twin that with somebody who was fairly good at maths and science at uni and the opportunity to study textile science, that gets you the rare commodity of being a textile scientist. People will then say, oh, I didn't know they existed, which is great. And then you think about it for 30 seconds and look around and you think about the fact that actually our work is everywhere in your life. It's just so out of sight, out of mind in considering how the things you use every day or that your life might even depend on came to be. So I am still here and we are still here, and we're going to be a big part of changing how we have our material footprint on the world, which is, I guess, the lead of this conversation today.
Well, let's bury the lead a little further. And I just wanted to ask a bit about, obviously, as you've said, you have a long background in textiles. A quick skim of your LinkedIn shows that you, as you said, studied textiles at probably the most textile city you could study textiles in. And it's just textiles all the way down. If I hadn't just heard you talk just then, I would have just guessed based on that skim of the LinkedIn that there's some sort of lifelong passion or something of the kind. What was the spark?
Well, I just enjoy being a maker, I guess. And I guess the other terminology I've used for it is being technically creative. And we exist in all sorts of industries. You find us doing stuff with metal. You find people doing this with timber or novel things. We're in industrial design and all over the place. And the particular medium that captured my imagination for as long as I can remember is textiles. And actually, the minute you step back and think about it and look at how massive and varied the world is, and historically how much value has been placed on textiles, not just for function, but also for luxury, beauty, storytelling, telling the stories of who we are and where we're from. Textiles have such a rich, long history and have been part of our trade routes and our wealth and our ability to explore. It's actually just fascinating. And the more you dig in, if you've got an even vaguely curious mind, the mix of engineering and creativity in the industry is absolutely phenomenal. So it's eternally interesting to me.
And I guess and I'll let you answer it, fascination with textile waste is a more recent thing. What drove you towards that? Was there an epiphany or just a gradual sort of awareness? Tell me about that.
That's a really great question. It's actually not new. The sense in general about the fact that we live on a finite planet actually dawned for me in the late 80s, which tells a lot about how old I am, when I first learned about the ozone layer. So it wasn't particularly about textiles. It's more about, and I guess, I don't know whether just being relatively hardwired to think in stuff, a sense that we live on a finite planet and we just can't keep trash in our backyard, and our backyard is the planet. And so I have always lived with a sense of wanting to work in an environmentally friendly way, much to the annoyance of people that know me or work with me. I never would stop banging on about it. But nearly 30 years ago, just before I started in the industry, it was really, to mention stuff like this, it's just not business. That's just, we're all reaping at the moment the fact that we pushed it, swept all that under the carpet 30 years ago. We're all facing the consequences of this mindset now. And what I also knew, though, was that to make a difference in this industry that we need is you can't just come out of uni and change the world. Well, you can try, and some people do, but you kind of need to understand an industry to be able to be effective, to do things differently. Because textile suffers from twin problems. It suffers from being a massive vehicle of trash on the planet in the form of fast fashion, merch, medical waste, cheap PPE, like all sorts, just so much stuff. but it also suffers from being one of the massive vectors of modern slavery. So it has this enormous, hideous social and environmental impact. And the thing that's really heartbreaking about that is none of it's necessary. None of it. And I guess knowing that this has to change, and knowing that when you flip that, when you've got manufacturing humming really well and everybody working really well together, factories can feel like family. The sense of satisfaction from working in manufacturing, creating something, working together as a team, creating something beautiful that people really enjoy, it makes your soul soar. And again, that goes for all sorts of manufacturing, not just textiles. It's just, I know textiles. So it's just such a crying shame that this human capability to work together and be creative has been absolutely broken on the race to the bottom for cheap stuff. And we absolutely have to do this differently. We don't even have a choice. And really now, you know, a lot of people obviously will talk about financial imperatives, and yet we see every day that the laws of that crash against the laws of physics all the time. Ask somebody with an uninsurable house. So this is why I'm still here. And I guess when I started my business with cotton, it was a sort of maturing of being able to put together the experience I built over years, working in lots of different parts of the chain and lots of different factories and in lots of different countries, that, okay, now's my opportunity to build a supply chain where I can sleep at night.
Let's sort of continue with a little context-related question. Textiles, clothing and footwear, it's sort of catch-all descriptor in Australia. Just, I guess, probably it's a function of us having not much of any of those three things. That's my guess. We sort of tend to think in terms of that very small marginal aggregator sector that probably went overseas in the main a long time ago. Is that an unfair description? Do we make things here when it comes to textiles and related industries? I can only think of at scale one or two things to do with textiles that we do. I would say geosynthetics is probably a good example. Mm-hmm. I mean, you probably have a much more comprehensive point of view. What's yours?
Yeah, well, I think that the challenge with the sector is textiles, clothing and footwear, which has essentially become a bureaucratic term to catch our industry, TCF, which you don't hear in other countries. People say, TCF, what are you talking about? And really, that's a whole, like, footwear just on its own. That's the leather industry. That's a whole bunch of technologies that really only are in footwear. And now there's all sorts of innovation around trying to, people that don't want to use leather, but then how do we not use plastics? There's just so many things going on just in that space that's particularly unique to it. And that's not just in footwear. It's in the footballs that are being kicked around right now. It's in, it's in so much. And then textiles and clothing, well, my God, that is such a vast array of product. Because we go from everything, like you say, geotextiles, which are massive non-wovens that are generally made from synthetics at the moment. And yes, we have a really successful sector in that here. But we go all the way through to couture. We have world-leading fibre growing industry in wool and cotton, but we don't connect the dots here now. So all of that goes overseas as a commodity. Just so, again, this challenge of not value adding. And 20 years ago, we did do everything here at quite a lot of scale, and textiles was essentially one of the industries that fell on the globalization sword, but didn't fall on a level playing field, because we've been really okay with, we're happy to import stuff that's made in conditions that we wouldn't permit here, essentially. And that might not necessarily be about labour, but about what we're prepared to allow flow into a river, or our social safety nets of working conditions as opposed to the actual working conditions themselves and all the rest of it. So we often say we can't afford to do things here, but when you cost things done overseas to the same grade of ethics that we would do here, actually, the costs don't differ nearly as much. And then the question of scale, yes, we are a mosaic of smaller and very small industries, but it is by no means actually a small industry. A study was done a couple of years ago, pulled together by EY for the Australian Fashion Council. And I believe we export over $6 billion of fashion and textile and clothing products made here, which is more than wine. It's just lots of small businesses in a vast array. So you've not got one great big mining company to talk to, or one great big commodity to talk to. And therefore, it's not so much of a big ribbon chopper, really, for announcements. And it's also a very female industry. And we have lots of businesses that are run around the flexibility of juggling life. So we just don't have the same lobbying power that other industry has, because we're actually scattered among so many sectors. People like to focus on fashion, but that's only part of the industry here. There's a massive, obviously, part in uniforms. We make firefighters wear here. I can imagine not being able to do that. We make those geotextiles, but we also have huge sector in technical textiles and recreational vehicle textiles and all sorts of other, so they're all things in their own right where in and of themselves, they're part of different industry segments, and textiles are just part of the thing that's used in an industry. Conveyor belts involve a coated textile, so there's so much. Then you've got the natural grown regenerated cellulose, and then you've got synthetics, but there's a huge variety just of the synthetics. So then when it comes to thinking about our waste streams, you're actually dealing with a massive collection of industries. It would be like talking about the beverage container industry as opposed to the aluminium, glass and plastic industry. And so textiles gets talked. Yeah.
I think it's which is why then almost a microcosm of manufacturing in general in Australia, where there's a huge amount of small players. It's really hard to measure because it cuts across so many other things, and it's invisible, but it's not insignificant.
That is a really great way to put it, Brent. And the other thing that happens is the product we make is soft. And just because the product's soft doesn't mean the engineering is. And so there's an awful lot of assumptions that this small, light, cheap to buy from overseas, what looks like it hasn't changed in decades, therefore, how can this be possibly worth considering making ourselves? Why value it? And yet we are incredibly at risk because we can do so little all the way from woe to go here. But they're on products that we don't value, like a bandage or a pair of socks. But if we ran out of them, it'd be messy.
Let's get to the news hook of this conversation. We're speaking because this opportunity came up as you were awarded a grant as part of the Country Road Climate Fund cohort. Congratulations, of course. Good to see good people do well. Tell us about the Mud to Marle project with Deakin University, Geelong Dyers and some others. I guess the listeners might not know everything about it. So tell us about its origins and what you're aiming to do.
Sure. I guess there's a few key things here, really. What we're doing here is systems innovation, not technical innovation. We're innovating on a system. So we are taking our current natural fibre, which is cotton. We're taking wool and a second grade wool. So we're going to be using fine merino, but the stuff that's naturally short that comes from the edge of the fleece that normally commands a slightly lower price. And we're going to blend that. But we're going to do it in a way where all the steps of the process, which we can still do here at pilot scale at Deakin, that's why we're working with them, to essentially do all the different stages between getting the fibre all the way to the garment, engineering it to be as low impact as possible. So how do we keep our water footprint as low as possible? How do we keep our energy and logistics footprint as low as possible, but also make a product that's actually going to be lovely to wear and durable and high quality? Also with that, taking advantage of the combined natural properties of wool and cotton, because they're slightly different. Cotton is an amazing fibre. It's naturally strong. It really is resilient. You can boil it, you can bleach it, you can do all sorts. Products can have some stretch, but wool has a little bit more natural stretch. However, wool is a bit tricky because if you want to make something completely machine washable from 100% wool, you have to actually treat it with the superwash process, which is quite an intervention really from a chemical point of view. So we're looking to put this together in such a way that we will have a machine washable product, but without needing to do the superwash process to the wool by nature of the blend. So we'll get some of the give that we get from wool and some of the properties there, but then the resilience that's naturally there from the cotton. And then the marl, that comes from what you can create when you dye just one of the fibres. So you're going to get a mix. Most people are familiar with that grey T-shirt look that looks a bit mixed. Most of those are created when we actually blend cotton and polyester in a yarn, and then just one of those are dyed to create the mixed colour. And the final advantage of doing this is to create a product with those properties with a little bit of stretch and extra comfort, but without needing to put either elastane, which is polyurethane, or do it with another synthetic fibre so that we can create a plastic-free solution as well. But all of the stages that we're going to do are current commercialised technology. We're just essentially putting the jigsaw back together in a different way.
So it's not a research project, though Deakin is involved and going to contribute in terms of piloting. It's important, I guess, to note that, because sometimes there are these R&D projects that go nowhere, but this has a mind for real-world application and for systems thinking and for practicality.
Yeah, so essentially we are using technology that's available in many parts of the world, and to scale it here, which is something else I'm working on. It's scalable with technology we could do many things with. So really it's about being really smart with the tools at hand and then doing it with the end in mind. And the other advantage, obviously, with being 100% natural, now we're talking about circularity, is to be not only grown in nature rather than needing to drill an oil well, but that at the end of its life it could safely compost. So we're also benefiting from the fact that Deakin are doing work on compostability of textiles. People might think, well, why are we testing that? I mean, surely you can bury some cotton in the garden and see if it's gone, or stick it in your compost bin. But for all the work that's been done on that, and a lot of the synthetic dyes, because we do dye things, we don't want everything to be white or beige. And a lot of work's being done in the textile industry to clean up synthetic dye stuffs. They're not what they were 30, 40, 50 years ago. But the work on actually checking that the soil's microbial health is still okay after it's broken it down, that's the work that Deakin are doing. So we will just get on the back of that as well, that we'll be able to twin that in with, I guess, that double check that the stuff that you can sort of test in a homegrown way to go, yeah, we can sling it in the compost bin and see it's not there, to just be sure that what that would look like if scaled as well is also something we can definitely say is okay, or, which dye stuffs we know have been totally okay.
The release mentions 140,000 grant, a bit of support, some mentoring and other assistance from Country Road, and a few other details, but it doesn't mention how long the project would run for. How long are you assuming this will take?
It'll take just under a year. We've just got started. We're selecting which colours we're going to put into the pilot batches at the moment, which again is one of those things that a lot of the time when it comes to research, it's like, why are you doing that? Well, this is one of the things about anything to do with the circular economy. We have to make a product that people will want. Then it's a bonus that it's potentially circular or regenerative or whatever. So that's the really nice thing about partnering with Country Road. And the other thing that's really great about the format of this fund is that essentially this is funding pilot batches that we just commercially need to try. So we're going to be being able to record a detailed data about the energy footprint at each stage and this, that, and the other. So then we'll know what that looks like at scale. But this is often the gap that hits a lot of our research. I call it the test tube to tons stage that really struggles to get support. So we're not doing anything that I can't imagine there's going to be a research paper publishable out of this. Maybe there is, but it's just something we need to physically try. And then once we've tried it, then it makes it easier to get behind scaling it, right? Because it's very difficult for anybody in a brand or in a buying team to get behind, we'll buy 20 tons a year or 50 tons a year. If you've never touched the product, you just can't do that. I worked in a buying team in my first job. There's no way on earth. So this stage of being able to put pilots in people's hands that are actually garment sized as opposed to some little forensic thumbnail size of something, that's what you have to do to then go, okay, we can do this. And those of us that are used to engineering and product development are often quite capable of ideating and imagining what something will be. But for most people and people with the purse strings, unless they physically touched it, it's not real. They don't believe it's possible. So this is the kind of work we have to do to prove what's possible.
Indeed, it's probably a digression, but one of the things I've noticed, and however long I've been doing this, is when we talk about innovation in Australia, it's like you mentioned, the test tube to tons. We think of innovation being got something in a lab, give it to some people with a bit of money, they scale it up and Bob's your uncle. There's no discussion about design thinking, about market development is almost always ignored, and about all the other problems that are associated after that when you try and scale up. It's just lab market. The gap there isn't even worth speaking about.
Yeah, and it reminds me actually of some work I did a couple of years ago, and I was asked to assess some projects that had been funded at early stage and what was likely to be commercialisable, if that's a word. And I just went, well, could this go through a machine at 100 metres a minute? And they looked at me and I'm like, well, unless it can, this is no way this is scaling into the global textile industry. Oh, And that's where, and again, this is one of the things that's a massive challenge when, and it happens particularly with circularity, an awful lot of the people, very keen, because we all want to not create the waste, but very few of the people around the table have ever actually worked in a factory. And it's the fetching and carrying, which is where the circular economy kind of falls or rises. And can you get it onto a pallet? Can you get it in or out of a hopper? How are you going to handle it in bulk? Does it go off? All these kind of things that really impact whether something's going to be feasible to get through a factory, or is it something that could be done with a current machine that's slightly tweaked? So I really think we are still yet to kind of put the doers before the ticket clippers.
Yep. I think that's a fair comment. What do you think that there's that disconnect in Australia? One of the presentations I saw that you forwarded on, you mentioned the sort of separation of manufacturing from the circular economy in some people's thinking, but the manufacturing side actually being critical to the whole thing working. What do you think that gap is there, and what do you want to say about that?
Oh, I think some of it's nomenclature and mindset, to be honest, Brett. Because when we talk about the circular economy and you talk to people, and they talk about innovation and all the rest of it, and you go, have you spoken to any manufacturers? And they kind of double take. And you can tell that there's almost a fear or an assumption that, and I had this conversation literally a few weeks ago with somebody who works in innovation. And I went, oh, do you think that factories that are fourth or fifth generation aren't innovative? And she didn't say anything, but you could just see it. And I was like, they wouldn't be here if they weren't innovative. They're the people ready to go. And to start manufacturing from a startup is massive, whereas if you can tweak a process or work with somebody to bring another capability while they've already got all the infrastructure in place that's used to managing doing stuff with stuff. And the other thing I say is about nomenclature, and I say this a lot now, there's no remanufacturing without manufacturing. And yet we've got all this support for research in the circular economy, but we'll let the manufacturers just die a death of 1,000 cuts. And yet that is the kind of, it's like we need to graft the circular economy onto the shrubs and trees of manufacturing. To grow something from seed is so much harder. Whereas if you can you've already got the roots in place. And it's like we're scared of being seen to support current manufacturing because we're just seen to be propping up manufacturing, which is, again, a nomenclature and a communications issue rather than a physical or technical issue. And then we have all sorts of settings in our system that just discourages reusing right through to factories, not just with small things. If you want to buy a second-hand piece of equipment or buy a factory and repurpose it, compared with fund a brand new factory with brand new machines in it, the asset write-down and tax deductibility is a completely different ballgame. So for investors, shiny and new has a tax incentive. This is wild. So we've got all of these things in our system to encourage innovation, but then we seem to be absolutely blinkered that innovation can be done with current technology. And actually that's at the heart of our opportunity to make the circular economy happen. I also think an awful lot of people in manufacturing probably think the circular economy is just a greeny kind of, weasel word, opposed to something that...
It's something you shoehorn into a media release if you've got someone who came out of university, knows the right buzzwords.
Exactly. So I think it's almost just about lexicon. And then I think the other thing is, for anybody in Australia who doesn't interact with manufacturing, obviously you do all the time, Brent, so many people just think we don't do any. So when you mention it, and then you're like, well, just think about it for 5 minutes, drive through one of our more industrial suburbs, and they're not all warehouses. There's loads of stuff going on. And, we just have this mindset where we've just been told that we can't do stuff for so long to justify not doing stuff. And certainly in the parts of industry I'm looking at, to be able to spin a yarn here again is not going to create a cast of 1,000 jobs because it's completely automated. There are factories that do this dark, there's a few people that do a bit of maintenance now and again. It's so amazingly advanced. But, really, we've got a sort of perception challenge as well. I hear that we've just said we can't do it, and therefore people just think we can't do it.
Yeah, it does become self-perpetuating, after a point, but there's nothing to say that we can't correct it, and that's what we're working on, one little step at a time.
Yeah, and I think, we've got a lot of things now in place where we're talking about reshoring, we're talking about sovereign capability and all this kind of stuff. I think probably one of our biggest challenges now with that is then when we decide to do stuff, somebody's like, oh, well, we're not interested unless it's a $50 million project or a $100 million project. We might need a scatter of $5 to $10 million projects in lots of places, which, again, aren't so ribbon cuttable maybe. Or I think we've got to be aware that the people and the advisors and the supposedly experts around all the committees and innovation panels that have got us to this point, that have missed all these opportunities, means we probably need to repopulate some of these advisory panels and boards with people who've actually been in manufacturing.
Yeah, I mean, some people with real world experience wouldn't hurt every now and then.
Yeah, and I think we need to not conflate mineral resources, first stage processing with complete manufacturing. It's really different. It's part of it, but it's not all of it. I think we sometimes confuse where somebody's expertise might be applicable.
Yeah, that's a fair comment. Another thing I love from your comments you made offline when we were speaking was that we don't need more R&D thrown at the problem that you're looking to address, that the tools exist already and can be acquired if you have the money, you have the will, you have all the other things. Not a blue sky sort of project. We need implementation. What exists now for textile-to-textile recycling, and what are some of the dollars involved?
Yeah, so this touches on the other thing I'm working on, which is the fibre foundry. So at the moment, Australia has a textile waste problem, and we are beginning to address it. And we have some capability to downcycle onshore, or we consolidate to send offshore for some recycling and some downcycling. But we don't have the ability to go all the way textile to textile. That is beginning to change with some people making non-wovens and sort of fillings and things, but not all the way to, say, something you could wear like a shirt or a T-shirt or something like that. So to do that, we need to be able to make yarn. And as I said before, at the moment, we don't have commercial scale yarn spinning here, apart from a little bit of wool. And so to do that, I've worked through what it would take to bring it back. This isn't going to solve our entire volume of problems, but it is at a scale that is commercially real, but also small enough that the community can engage, as well as large enough that business can engage. And the idea behind that is to put in the capability to be able to virgin spin cotton in a basic way. And then if you add one more machine to that, you can tear up old textiles and blend that in with virgin fibre. And that's called ragging and tearing. This technology in itself isn't new. It's actually been around for a really long time, like Industrial Revolution kind of time. But what has, of course, changed is the speed, automation, and efficiency with which of the machines that we can do it with. And one of the ironies now, because people who know me well know I've been talking about this for a long time, is that the lead time on the machines that do the tearing and recycling is now out to at least 2 years, because the world's woken up to the need to recycle textiles, which is a good thing. And the scope and scale of that project, we need about $3 million of machinery, which in the grand scheme of things in manufacturing is actually not a huge amount of money. We need 2,000 square metres, and obviously we need to go through the process of setting up, ordering that, equipping a place, etc. So that's going to, the global figures on the minimum scale to do anything in textile recycling is about $5 million project. And Blocktex, that has become on stream now here up in Logan, I think was a similar scale investment. So while they've commercialised a really cool technology to separate polyester and cotton with an enzyme, which gives you polyester chips and cellulose powder, what it does exemplify is that getting on the ground and getting the engineering in place and setting up a team and getting going and spending the years doing that is about that order of magnitude. So it's obviously not no money, but when I think about some of the figures we see bandied around that get spent on apps that don't work and this, that, and the other, good God, if I had $30 million, I'd have a building bought outright, I'd have a playground for textile circularity, and we'd be producing and recycling locally as well. And I think, again, then that's where we sort of end up in this funny no man's land of it's big compared with a pilot, but I also know other people that know people that invest, they go, oh, no, they're not investing in anything less than 50 million. And you're like, righto. I think it's interesting. I also think our innovation ecosystem is hardwired to investing in tech. Yep. And therefore, anything physical, like we have to actually put machines in a building and make this happen. A lot of those investors run for the hills. This is not a VC type investment. This is not that kind of stuff, because if you want to scale processing, you have to scale the capacity. It's not like selling an ebook or software as a service that you can just sell the file again. Do you know what I mean? So it is almost like sometimes people talk about the circular economy like it's in the cloud, and it's like, no, we have to actually do this somewhere with stuff in a place.
Yeah, there's no app for spinning yarn as far as I know.
Yeah, and yet the flip of that is that with all the concern about what AI is going to do to jobs, AI is not going to recycle our textiles. It may help us sort them. It may help us automate some of the process, but the physical process has to be done for real. And the physical making of anything has to be done for real.
And so, yeah, that's pretty much what I want to ask. There are a few other things, but we're sort of way over time. So I'll just get to the last question. And so the final question we like to ask guests is, what's one issue within manufacturing that isn't getting the attention it deserves? So we've had a pretty decent sized conversation above. You may have touched on it already, but if you haven't, you're welcome to sound off on one final bit of soapboxing.
Oh, essential supply chains and sovereign capability. We are frighteningly at risk. We can't make a sandbag or a tarp from scratch in this country. And when I look at the fires in Europe at the moment, most of the high-tech fabrics that our firefighters wear, a lot of them are made in that part of the world. What's happened to those lead times? Because I wouldn't mind betting they're suddenly screaming down all the stocks there, and they would, of course, be equipping their own people first. A year ago, talking to a friend who's in that sector, lead times on some of the really advanced composites and laminates was out from 6 weeks to 6 months. That was a year ago. And that's a complex product, but we can't even make a bandage from scratch in this country. So the other thing that we need to do when we bring back the capability to make yarn is that we actually bring back the capability to do the basics. I don't expect for 5 minutes that we would make everything for ourselves, but to be in a position where we cannot make any of those things for ourselves is pretty wild. And I just don't think anybody's looking at it. I don't think it's anybody's job to look at it. When I talk to people in bureaucracy and government, they kind of go, oh, yeah, that sounds like a risk. But God, we've struggled with even fuel security and urea security. So if we've struggled with that, there's no way anybody's dealing with these products.
Yeah, well, you think of a Band-Aid, and your average person who's not involved in making things and doesn't think too deeply about them will probably just think, oh, that's something I can buy from the servo. But what happens when the servo can't get them, and what happens when the place that supplies the servo can't get them, and so on and so forth? Then where are you?
Yep. And again, because the actual items themselves are so cheap, they seem so simple, they're soft, they're light. The idea of being without them is preposterous to most people. But I think, I don't know, they think stork brings them. I don't know how people think these things arrive. So I am concerned that, we talk about national security, but we seem to be very obsessed with our sovereign capability to kill and absolutely ignorant of our sovereign capability to care.
Yeah. Right. Well, that's a pretty weighty note to end on, but that's a good thing sometimes. Meriel, it's been a treat to speak to you. Thanks for donating your time. Congratulations again on the Country Road Initiative. And, hopefully we speak again soon.
Brilliant. Thanks, Brent. Take care.